The nation stands on edge tonight, as a bombshell revelation rocks the very heart of British politics. An eye-watering $22 billion fraud scandal has just been exposed live on television, sending shockwaves through Parliament and sparking immediate furious calls for Keir Starmer's resignation. The stakes have never been higher, and the political fallout is unfolding in real time. What really happened? Who is responsible? And what does this mean for the future of the Labour Party and the country? The answers could change everything. The explosive revelation came during a primetime interview when a whistleblower laid bare one of the biggest financial scandals in recent history. A staggering $22 billion lost or misappropriated, tied to government contracts and shadowy deals linked directly to senior figures in the Labour Party's inner circle. The details are shocking. Billions siphoned off through complicated schemes that were hidden in plain sight, using layers of shell companies and manipulated paperwork. The fraud wasn't just a small error or an isolated incident. This was a systematic, deliberate plundering of public funds meant to support vital services, support vulnerable communities, and rebuild the economy. Instead, those billions disappeared into the pockets of a few, betraying the trust of millions of taxpayers. As the whistleblower's testimony aired live, the silence in the studio was deafening. Experts, politicians, and the public alike struggled to grasp the scale and audacity of the crime. The allegations went straight to the top, with insiders implicating key Labour officials who allegedly turned a blind eye, or worse, orchestrated the scheme. Suddenly, Keir Starmer's leadership, long criticised for wavering and cautious politics, was under a fresh, unprecedented attack. Questions erupted about how much Starmer knew and how deeply involved he might be. Allegations that he had ignored warnings or actively covered up the scandal to protect his political future. The response was immediate and explosive. Across the country, calls for Starmer to resign flooded social media, petitions circulated demanding a full public inquiry, and opposition leaders smelled blood. The Conservative Party wasted no time in capitalising on the crisis, painting Labour as a party riddled with corruption and deceit. Even some Labour MPs, known for their loyalty, began distancing themselves, worried about their own political futures and the damage to their reputation. The unity of the Labour Party was shattered almost overnight. Behind the scenes, frantic meetings took place. Advisers scrambled to craft damage control statements, but the scale of the scandal made every attempt seem feeble. Starmer himself faced relentless pressure in private and public. His silence only fueled speculation and anger. How could a party leader allow such a colossal betrayal of public trust under his watch? And more importantly, how would the British people react as this story continues to unfold? The timing couldn't be worse for Starmer. Just weeks before crucial local elections, and with the next general election looming, this scandal threatens to destroy Labour's chances and reshape the entire political landscape. The public's faith in politicians, already fragile, now risks plunging to new lows. With every hour, more details emerge, each more damning than the last. The political world waits with bated breath to see if Starmer will fight to clear his name or step aside in the face of overwhelming evidence. The revelation of this staggering $22 billion fraud has exposed deep flaws, not only within the Labour Party, but across the entire political and bureaucratic system that allowed such a massive deception to occur unchecked. The origins of the fraud trace back several years, during a period when government contracts were awarded rapidly under emergency conditions, supposedly to deal with crises like the pandemic and economic recovery programs. What was meant to be swift action to protect the nation instead became the perfect cover for fraudulent activities. Complex webs of subcontractors, dubious firms with no track record, and inflated invoices created a labyrinth that was nearly impossible for ordinary oversight bodies to untangle. Yet, despite early warning signs and whistleblower reports, these alarming red flags were either ignored or buried by those in power. The scale of the mismanagement reveals a culture of complacency and collusion that went beyond simple negligence. Investigations now suggest that senior Labour officials were not merely passive bystanders, but active participants in the scheme. This network allegedly manipulated contracts to funnel public money toward political allies, private interests, and offshore accounts. The scandal also highlights how blurred the lines have become between politics, business, and personal gain. Instead of serving the public good, the system was weaponized to enrich a small group at the expense of millions who rely on government services daily. This betrayal has ignited fierce public outrage, as many families face cuts to healthcare, education, and social support, while these sums vanished in the shadows. Keir Starmer's role has become the central question of this unfolding crisis. Documents leaked alongside the exposé show meetings where concerns about the contracts were raised, but no action followed. Critics argue that Starmer, as party leader, either lacked the will or the capacity to confront the corruption within his ranks. Supporters claim he was misled and unaware of the full extent, but even this defence is weakening amid growing evidence. The pressure on Starmer to provide clear answers is mounting from all sides. Members of his own party, fearing electoral ruin, have started pushing for an independent inquiry to establish the truth. Meanwhile, public confidence in his leadership is eroding fast, reflected in plummeting poll numbers and vocal dissatisfaction. In town halls and grassroots events, the political ramifications of this scandal stretch far beyond the Labour Party. It has intensified calls for systemic reforms in how government contracts are awarded and monitored. Transparency advocates are demanding stronger safeguards and accountability mechanisms to prevent future abuses. The scandal also risks deepening political divisions in the UK, already strained by years of economic hardship, social unrest, and Brexit fallout. Trust in politicians, regardless of party, is near an all-time low, and many voters express growing cynicism about whether real change is possible. This environment threatens to fuel extremist movements and disillusionment, challenging the very fabric of British democracy. Internationally, the scandal has not gone unnoticed. Allies and adversaries alike are watching closely as Britain grapples with the fallout. Questions about governance, rule of law, and political stability arise whenever such large-scale corruption surfaces. The UK's reputation as a leading democracy, committed to transparency and fairness, faces serious damage. Economic consequences may follow as investors and businesses reconsider their confidence in the UK market. The timing could not be worse as the country seeks to recover from economic challenges and rebuild its global standing post-Brexit. As investigations continue, the media spotlight remains fixed on every development. Journalists dig deep into financial records, interview insiders, and uncover further details that paint a grim picture of unchecked greed and abuse of power. Public demonstrations have erupted in major cities, with protesters demanding justice and accountability. The momentum behind the calls for Starmer's resignation is intensifying, fueled by a sense of betrayal and urgency. Parliament itself is gripped by crisis, with emergency sessions convened to address the scandal, yet the path forward remains unclear. Amid this turmoil, the Labour Party faces an existential challenge. Can it recover from the damage inflicted by the scandal, or will this be the moment that fractures the party beyond repair? The answer depends on the steps Starmer and his allies take in the coming weeks. Transparency, cooperation with investigators, and decisive action may help restore some public trust. Failure to act swiftly and decisively risks deepening the crisis, inviting further political upheaval and possibly triggering early elections. For millions watching, this scandal is not just a political drama. It is a stark reminder of the fragility of public institutions and the urgent need for reform. The political storm unleashed by the $22 billion fraud scandal has sent shockwaves through Westminster, triggering a relentless scramble among politicians, party strategists, and legal experts to manage the fallout. As the layers of deception unravel, what becomes glaringly evident is how deeply entrenched the issues of governance and accountability are within the corridors of power. Starmer's leadership is now under a microscope like never before. This is not just a scandal of financial wrongdoing, it is a test of leadership, integrity, and the future direction of the Labour Party itself. The opposition parties have seized upon this moment, with the Conservatives and smaller factions demanding full transparency, investigations, and swift justice. The narrative in the media is dominated by urgent questions about how such a massive fraud could have been orchestrated and concealed right under the noses of regulators, parliamentarians, and the public. Starmer's responses so far have done little to quell the growing storm. His public statements have been measured, calling for investigations while insisting on cooperation with authorities. However, critics accuse him of evading full responsibility and lacking the decisive leadership needed in a crisis of this magnitude. Leaked internal communications suggest a party divided, with some senior figures pushing for a clean break from the implicated individuals and policies, while others urge caution, fearful that aggressive moves could backfire politically. The tension within Labour is palpable, as the party's grassroots members demand transparency and accountability, fearing that failure to act decisively could cost them the trust of millions of voters ahead of the next general election. The opposition has wasted no time capitalising on the scandal. Conservative leaders have framed the fraud as evidence of Labour's systemic corruption and unfitness to govern. They have vowed to hold emergency parliamentary sessions and launch independent inquiries that could lead to prosecutions. The political battle lines are drawn sharply, with Reform UK and other smaller parties also adding fuel to the fire by spotlighting Labour's failures on governance and public spending. This heightened political polarisation only adds to the sense of instability gripping the country. The scandal threatens to dominate British politics for months, potentially reshaping alliances, voter loyalties, and the national conversation. About corruption and public trust, public reaction has been intense and widespread. Across social media platforms, hashtags calling for Starmer's resignation have trended repeatedly, reflecting a groundswell of anger and disillusionment. Town halls and local meetings have been filled with heated debates as constituents express their frustration at what they see as a betrayal of public trust. Many ordinary citizens, already struggling with cost of living pressures, feel that their hardships have been compounded by the reckless mismanagement and greed exposed in the scandal. Opinion polls show a sharp decline in Labour's popularity, with some surveys indicating that trust in Starmer's leadership is now at its lowest point since he became party leader. The calls for him to step down are not just coming from opposition voices, but from within his own party ranks, signalling a potential leadership crisis that could force an early leadership contest. Legal experts have weighed in on the complexity of unravelling such a vast financial fraud. The $22 billion figure represents one of the largest frauds in UK history, involving intricate schemes designed to evade detection. Authorities face significant challenges in tracing the flow of funds, through multiple layers of shell companies, offshore accounts, and forged documentation. The role of regulatory bodies is also under scrutiny, with questions raised about whether they had sufficient resources and powers to prevent or detect fraud on this scale. Calls for reform in auditing and compliance practices have intensified, with many experts urging the government to overhaul oversight mechanisms to close loopholes and increase transparency. This scandal highlights the urgent need for systemic change in how public money is monitored and spent. At the same time, the political and social consequences of the scandal ripple far beyond immediate financial loss. The erosion of public trust in politicians and institutions undermines the democratic process itself. Citizens become cynical, disengaged, and more susceptible to misinformation and extremist rhetoric. The challenge for Britain's political class is to restore faith through clear, honest, and effective leadership. Failure to do so risks further alienation of voters, potentially empowering fringe groups and destabilising the political landscape. The scandal, therefore, is a pivotal moment, not just for Labour, but for the health of British democracy as a whole. The next steps taken by Starmer and the Labour Party will be critical. Transparency in cooperating with investigators, holding those responsible accountable, and presenting a clear plan for reform are essential to regaining public confidence. Starmer must navigate a path between acknowledging past mistakes and positioning the party as a credible alternative to the Conservatives. How he manages this crisis will define his political legacy and shape the future trajectory of the party. In the coming weeks, expect intensified media scrutiny, parliamentary debates, and public demonstrations as the scandal continues to unfold, and the nation watches with bated breath. The moment has arrived for every citizen who values honesty, transparency, and true accountability in government to raise their voice louder than ever before. This is not just a political scandal, it is a defining moment that will shape the future of British democracy. The exposed $22 billion fraud is a stark reminder that unchecked power and complacency can lead to catastrophic consequences for the public. It is now on all of us to demand immediate and decisive action. The calls for Keir Starmer to resign are growing louder for a reason. Leadership must be held accountable when the very foundations of trust are shattered. Silence or apathy will only allow corruption to fester and deepen. Contact your local representatives, make your concerns known, and insist on full investigations. Demand transparency in every step of the process, and call for stronger safeguards to prevent such a disaster from ever happening again. The power to bring change lies not only in Parliament, but in the hands of the people. Mobilise your community, join peaceful protests, and use social media platforms to spread awareness about the scandal and the urgent need for reform. Every voice adds pressure on those in power to act responsibly and swiftly. The Labour Party itself must hear from its members and supporters. If you believe in the principles of fairness and justice, push for internal reforms and leadership accountability. The future of the party depends on its ability to confront this crisis head-on and rebuild trust from the ground up. For Keir Starmer, this is a crossroads. Resignation might be the only path to restore some semblance of integrity and allow the party to start anew. The time for complacency has passed. The stakes are too high and the damage too deep. Stand firm against corruption and demand a new era of leadership that prioritises the people over power. Your engagement today can prevent further decay and ensure that justice prevails. The eyes of the nation are watching, and history will remember how we respond to this crisis. It's time to act. The call for Starmer's resignation is not just a political chant. It is a demand for accountability, responsibility, and a future where the public's trust is never again betrayed. The fight for integrity in British politics starts now.